We are here today with the first ever DeanCast, and as my first ever guest, we have a longtime friend of mine, longtime recruiting insider for our Michigan 24/7 sports site, Steve Lorenz. Welcome, Steve. Again, it's our first ever DeanCast. Welcome.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for letting me be the first ever guest. It means a lot. I appreciate it.
Well, it's appropriate timing. It, of course, is Ohio State-Michigan week, or, as they would say in Ann Arbor, Michigan-Ohio State week. We're going to talk recruiting, definitely, Ohio State, Michigan recruiting. But first, let's talk a little bit in general about Ohio State and Michigan. The Wolverines are 8-3 right now. Certainly not quite what was expected in Ann Arbor this year. What is kind of the temperature, how people are feeling up there in Michigan with the game coming up and the Wolverines standing at 8-3 and how things have gone this season, Steve?
I think so I picked Michigan to go 9-3 this year. So at this point right now, I'd say they've slightly underachieved, in my opinion. I think the biggest thing is just frustration at and continued ineptitude offensively. Obviously, the story that they lost a lot of starters from last year's offense, but they did on defense too, and the defense has been awesome. Pretty similar to what they were last year. I still think they're in the top 5, nationally in a bunch of categories. For me, I think the biggest thing is the offensive line still an inability to produce in big games. Wisconsin being the latest, last week where, it's nice, they had, 200-yard backs against Rutgers or Maryland, I can't remember which one, but, running the ball really successfully against teams, poor teams. But when they take on a quality opponent, the offensive line seems to fold. So, I think that's the biggest issue for most fans is just, the offense has been really frustrating this season. In a lot of different positions, but I think namely the offensive line. And, 10 wins the first 2 seasons. I think the 2015 season, the fact they won 10 that year was pretty amazing. I think it might have maybe made expectations too high too quickly, given, I think like a lot of people, like I said, myself included, did not anticipate this year was going to match last year and maybe the year before. So there's always frustration, obviously, that they haven't beat a team with a winning record yet this year. So it's kind of one of those things where, yeah, they're 8-3, but it's not really necessarily a great 8-3 at this point. So as always, Saturday, an opportunity again for Michigan to erase all that. If they can pull it out, I think the season all of a sudden looks up. The future looks bright. They return pretty much everybody next year. So, that's what makes this game so big. Even when the stakes aren't 1 and 2, maybe like they were in 2006, or it's not for the Big Ten championship. It's still a major opportunity for Michigan to turn things around, and then obviously for Ohio State to clinch the East.
Well, let's move to Jim Harbaugh now. There's speculation, and again, that's what it is at this point, that, what is Jim Harbaugh's future? I remember when he was first hired, you and I talked about how long would he be at Michigan, and I remember you saying you thought it would be at least 3 or 4 years, and we would see after that. We're at that point now that you talked about initially. Obviously, the Indianapolis Colts, they've come up. The Cleveland Browns went after Jim Harbaugh hard when he was with the 49ers. What do you see? What's your thinking on Jim Harbaugh's future at Michigan?
I don't think he's leaving anytime soon still. I think it would, at the very least, he'd have to accomplish some of the goals that I believe he set out for the program before he'd even consider it. I can't imagine anybody wanting to touch the Browns job at this point anyway. I know I wouldn't if I was him. Really, you could maybe say the same for Indy, actually. But, I think it's a situation where they haven't accomplished what he set out to do when he got here, obviously, at this point. Until they get, until they can at least win a Big Ten title, maybe multiple, and then, just bring the program back to where it was, before Rodriguez. Even that pertains to the rivalry too. It's been 14 years or 15 years of complete Ohio State dominance. The John Cooper days are distant memories at this point. So, I think, getting Michigan back to what Michigan fans, maybe my age or people around my age group are, maybe grew up used to as a young fan, I think is what he's aiming for, and I don't anticipate that he'd jet before that happens. One thing I do know for a fact, the money it's not important. I know, Michigan's obviously taking very, very good care of him, but an NFL team coming along with maybe flashing more cash or coach GM control type stuff, that's not going to really be the issue. Or that's not going to be like a factor that's going to, sway him away from Ann Arbor. So, he's got his whole family there. His mom and dad live like 2 miles from him. His son's on the staff with him. His son's a student. Other son's a student at Michigan. So, I think he's pretty firmly entrenched. And he'd be crazy. He wants to see it through. So, I think I read yesterday. I mean, who knows? But with Brady Quinn's report yesterday that Michigan they were working on a lifetime contract, which who knows with that. I think Coach K for Duke is like the only college coach I can think of that's ever happened with. Probably just a rumor, but I don't anticipate a departure for the NFL anytime in the near future at this point. I think we can reiterate, or we can double what I said earlier, I guess. I think it'd be another 3 or 4 years at least at this point.
Okay, let's move to recruiting now, Steve. The game, always huge for recruiting. When it's at Ohio State, it's their biggest recruiting weekend during the season. Michigan's going to have a lot of prospects up there. Just give me a quick rundown of some of the names, the big name guys that Michigan is going to expect in for visits for the game on Saturday.
There are a few headliners. I think the three biggest ones. Number one would probably be Nick Petit-Frere. Ohio State fans well aware of who he is. Number one offensive tackle in the country, according to us at 24/7 Sports. Michigan, Notre Dame are the only two officials that he's, after he takes this one, those are the only ones that they've taken so far. I believe Sam Webb of our site was in Florida last week, and he hasn't decided what 3 schools are going to get the other officials. Obviously, I think, Bill, you and I would probably assume Ohio State is going to be one of those schools. He's probably the biggest name. Yabi Anoma out of Baltimore, St. Francis Academy, he'll be on campus. Kind of looks like a Michigan-Alabama battle right now. Top 50 kid, probably been their top defensive end target for a while. I think they'd love to have another defensive end in this cycle to add on with Aiden Hutchinson. And then Jamar Chase is probably the other big time former Florida commit. Michigan hasn't signed they've signed a couple guys out of Louisiana, but not like a guy that LSU would want. Probably since like the A-Train or Chris Howard, like back in the 90s, and they're in striking distance with Chase. So I think that's a really big visit. We talked about Owe, or is it Owe, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but he'll be on campus too, the New Jersey prospect. That's one I think Michigan's just going to see what happens there. I think they know they can impress him, but, I know we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but, Ohio State, Penn State kind of been running pole position there for a while. So those 4 guys, they got some good underclassmen coming in too. The Trinity Catholic group out of St. Louis, Isaiah Williams, Marcus Washington, Shimon Cooper, Mookie Cooper, 2020 running back. They'll be on campus. And those are some big guys. Shane Lee, 2019 top 100 linebacker from St. Francis Academy. He'll also be there. Kal-El Mullings, Massachusetts product. I think we have him somewhere in the top 50 in the 2020 rankings too. So pretty big. Obviously, it's always a really, really big weekend for them. Probably their most significant weekend just because the weather factor when they played Michigan State at night with that monsoon really didn't help them. I think they had 4 kids from California taking an official visit that weekend. I don't really think the weather helped them out very much that weekend. So This weekend should be a little bit different in that regard. So those are the big names. There are other names out there we've been reporting on, but those are the ones I'm kind of focused on.
Okay, and you mentioned Nicholas Petit-Frere. The way I look at things right now, Ohio State and Michigan have three common targets, so to speak. And I'll give you my thoughts real quick, and I just want to hear your quick thoughts on them. Jason Owe, you touched on him already. I still think it's going to come down as things stand right now to Ohio State or Penn State for Jason. But as you mentioned, Michigan has their chance to impress him this weekend. You've got Nicholas Petit-Frere we talked about. I think that's going to – he is planning to make an official visit as things stand right now to Ohio State. But I think it's going to be a tough pull for the Buckeyes. I think he is more likely to stay in Florida or perhaps go to Notre Dame. We'll see. And then Tyler Friday made an official visit to Ohio State last weekend. It went very well, and I think the Buckeyes have a real shot. I think his decision will probably come down to Michigan or Ohio State or maybe Penn State. So those are my thoughts on those three. How do you see those three, Petit-Frere, Friday, and Owe?
So Owe is somebody, I think, unless Michigan really impresses this weekend, I haven't put any crystal ball in on him yet. Just Michigan got in pretty late, obviously, but Ohio State is always who I've heard, especially when asking around about him immediately after they offered. Ohio State is where I would go. I don't know. Does Penn State? I think they have a slight lead on the crystal ball. I know the crystal ball for him is like really, really close right now, but I feel like the Buckeyes got probably the last 10 or 11 predictions. Ohio State's probably where I would lean there. With Petit-Frere, I know Notre Dame really, really impressed. With Florida, it's interesting now because of the coaching situation. I mean, I guess it depends on who they hire. If they hire Chip Kelly, who knows? I mean, that's going to help Florida. They'll have a better chance with him now if they hire Chip Kelly than they would if McElwain was still there, I would think. So he's one that Michigan thinks that they can really make a big move with, though. He's been adamant about the academics. I know Hank South, our Alabama analyst, has told me that in the past that if Alabama's academic programs were, top of the line, that he might have already committed to Alabama, but it's kind of what's hindering their chances with him. So I think Michigan feels like they can really impress there, and they need an instant impact offensive tackle this cycle. Tyler Friday's probably the one I probably feel like Michigan's got the best shot with for sure. He's really comfortable with the multitude of New Jersey prospects Michigan has on campus. The staff has a great relationship with his family and prospect, obviously, despite the Don Bosco relationship there with Chris Partridge. Friday, probably the guy, if I had to peg him somewhere today, I still think it'd be Michigan. But I agree. I think that might be the one that does come down to Michigan and Ohio State. And who knows, it can be anywhere at that point, but he's the one I definitely think Michigan's got the best shot with.
And finally, to wrap things up, Steve, right now Ohio State's number one in the 24/7 Sports composite recruiting rankings. Michigan's number 13. I'm going to give my quick synopsis on where Ohio State finishes. I want to hear what you think of where Michigan finishes. I think the Buckeyes, if they land the guys I think that they're likely to land, Jackson Carman, Cameron Babb, et cetera, I think they have a very good chance of keeping that number one spot and winning the recruiting rankings war this year. But again, they've got to finish but I think they have a pretty decent chance to finish number one. Michigan number 13, how do you see them finishing?
They'll move up. Most of their big targets still haven't decided, but it's twofold. I don't think they're going to be top 5. They're not taking enough guys this cycle. I mean, they signed, 28 in 2016, and they signed 30 in 2017. This is going to be a smaller class. They're not going to do what Ohio State did in 17. I know they had a smaller class, but it was pound for pound one of the best recruiting classes ever. Michigan rating-wise is not going to hit that for sure. But they're getting it's an interesting cycle. They've taken a lot of guys, early verbals from some guys that will probably take a little bit longer to develop but have really high ceilings. I think that's because they like the 58 that they've signed the last two cycles. They can use a few of these guys to take a little more time to develop them. So they'll move up. I don't know. I'm somewhere in like the 7 to 9 range right now for them. I think they'd be okay with that. Like I said, not signing a big class, gotten top targets so far at most of the positions. If they were to get a Jamar Chase, that'd be that's all. They just need one wide receiver this cycle. They took 4, last year. So, it's all for them, it's really going to come down to how they finish, though. I mean, Ohio State's already, I would assume it'd be a catastrophe if they didn't sign top 3 at this point with who they already got. But for Michigan, it's going to depend even more on how they finish. But they've actually finished strong the last couple cycles, which, under Brady Hoke, it was the opposite. Get off to a hot start, kind of falter, later in the cycle, miss out on a lot of big guys late. This staff's been able to close on a lot of their top targets. So if history holds, I think they'll close strong again, and they'll probably end somewhere in the 6 to 10, 7 to 9 range.
Very good, Steve. I appreciate your time, and it's been great having you on at the first ever DeanCast, and have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see what happens on Saturday in Ann Arbor. Thanks again, Steve.
Yep, thanks a lot, Bill.